Thank you. Well, listening to my introduction, I'm like thinking, do I really do all those things, or did I just thought, it'll sound really good, I'll write it down. What that actually means is when you get down toward the end of there and it starts talking about these honorary memberships and things, what that means is I'm lucky enough to get the opportunity to be able to share information and knowledge with lots of folks, but not always lucky enough to be able to attend and gain other levels of memberships within organizations. So a lot of times they will indoctrinate me and give me an honorary, if you would. So a couple things I should tell you about me that were not in the introduction. You will probably pick up on this pretty quickly. I was raised in the South. I have spent pretty much all my working life in the South. So I do speak with a little bit of a Southern dialect, and as I tell people, I speak Greek and Latin and Southernese. So if you hear me spout out something like ambystoma, and you go, isn't that supposed to be abystoma? Not in the South. Actually, it is abystoma. The other thing you'll find out is that I get really excited about my topic. So sometimes I have a tendency to want to talk really fast the more excited I get. So don't let me talk too fast, because I might leave you behind and you'll be like, I have no idea what that guy just said. If I do start to do that, just say, hey, can you repeat that? Or ask me to slow down a little bit. I'd be more than glad to. Now, having told you that, I should probably also tell you, I'll let you guess. What is my favorite group of animals on the planet? I like all kinds of different animals. But what do you think is my favorite group of animals? Salamanders, you got it. So you think I'm going to get excited? Definitely. So you guys keep me on my toes, okay? All right. Is the lighting okay? Do we need to drop the front lights or just for a little bit? Yeah, that's perfect. Okay. As the title says, we're going to be looking at different salamanders found throughout the Carolinas. Specifically, I'm going to be talking more about things that are found in South Carolina and North Carolina. But please also understand that some of these salamanders do occur within our neighboring states as well. Salamanders, just like many of our other plant and animal species we have in the area, we're pretty lucky to live in probably one of the most diverse areas on the planet. So with that said, we have the greatest diversity of salamanders in North America. The only place within the world that has a greater diversity than what we have within the Appalachian Mountains is if you head into the tropical area. All right? Why do you think there'd be more species in the tropics?
Because it's really wet, so there's more plants there.
Okay, it's really wet. So it's a rainforest. We also have rainforest here in South Carolina, but our rainforests are temperate rainforests, not tropical. So tropical rainforests are going to be really wet, but they're going to be really warm too. Okay? But not so warm that salamanders are going to overheat. Here's why. Salamanders are ectothermic. That's the scientific word for cold-blooded. In other words, they do not generate their own body temperature internally like you and I do. Their body temperature is regulated by what's around them. Okay? So by being in areas that are warmer and wet, creates the opportunity to have a great diversity. But as I mentioned, right here in our own backyard, along the Blue Ridge Escarpment, along the southern Appalachian Mountains, we received the second highest average rainfall in North America. The only place that gets more rain than we do on an average basis in North America is going to be in the Pacific Northwest. So we got a lot of water. That water gathers and collects, many times just in forms of rainfall, but when it hits the ground, we get all these incredible mountain streams and Piedmont streams that are cascading across the rocks. And if you notice as it cascades across, it looks sort of white and bubbly. What's the white bubbly stuff?
Water.
There's something in the water. It looks like foam. Ready? Take a deep breath. And hold it until you can think of what the white bubbly stuff is. Anybody got it yet?
Air.
Air, very good. It's oxygen. Whew. Everybody can breathe now. All right? All right. For salamanders, that's pretty important. Just like you and I, salamanders have to have oxygen. Okay? And depending on what kind of salamander you are, some need more oxygen than others. And that oxygen availability depends upon what kind of salamander you are. Some salamanders have lungs. Some salamanders breathe through their skin. Some salamanders breathe through their skin and by swallowing air. They don't even have lungs. So that's a pretty interesting thing to think about. Here's an animal that has a backbone. They're vertebrates. So a pretty complex animal, pretty detailed, lots of working parts, but it doesn't have a set of lungs. Okay? Think about it. That's pretty amazing. I put this one in here just for fun for the locals. Beautiful waterfall located between Tryon and Saluda. Anybody know where it is? Pierson Falls, that's right. I put it in here for two reasons. One is it's somewhere that you recognize, but also notice all of these rock crevices in here, all these fractures. And if we look at those fractures up close, you'll notice that there are all these little colonies and little micro habitats or places in which salamanders can survive. By the way, if you look right there, look really closely, shiny, elongated, big pair of eyes right there sitting on the top. Yep, that is a salamander. Every time I've been to Pierson Falls and I walk by that rock that drips all that beautiful water, and I look in there and spend just a little bit of time, I'm going to see this guy. Maybe not the same one, but I'm going to see one that looks very much like it. As a matter of fact, when it looks up at me, if I'm patient enough, it'll raise its head up, looking around with those large eyes, also smelling. That's one of the ways they communicate. That's one of the ways they know what's around them is through smelling. But when it raises it up, I can see under its chin and the top part of its underside, and it's completely black. That tells me it's a black-bellied salamander. We only have 2 species of salamanders in the eastern United States that have a black belly. And there's really only one to most people, but if you're what is called a splitter, there's the dwarf black-bellied salamander. Either way, they have black bellies. You'll notice that when we start bringing salamanders around in about 10 minutes or so, that as these stand on the side, you're not going to see a black belly on them. Okay? But we get into certain places within the Carolinas, particularly up in the Piedmont area, you get to areas like this, where you've got non-moving water, but then there's like the perfect place for an amphibian. Nice and green, could have some frogs in there. It does, by the way. Could have many different types of salamander species in there as well. By the way, why do salamanders typically live near water? Let's get this young man.
So they don't dry out.
So they don't dry out. Remember we said that some of them are breathing through their skin. Okay? So that they don't dry out. What other reason might they live near water?
So they can breathe. They probably can, if they can't escape from humans on land, they could go in the water and swim to the other side.
Oh, nice. Maybe by living near the water, they have some ability to be able to move faster than on land. And so it helps them to get away from things that might be danger, like a predator. Okay? Also, being amphibious means that part of your life is in water and part of your life is on land. That's what the name amphibian means. And most salamanders spend part of their life in an aquatic environment, in water. Although there are a group of salamanders that their entire amphibious stage, in other words, the whole time that they're in water, is inside the egg. Once they come out of the egg, they look like little tiny versions of mom and dad. They don't need to be in water anymore, but they do need to stay moist, okay? As you look out into these areas, you'll start to notice there's big globs. And when you see these large globs of sort of a gelatinous material with lots of things grouped together, look a little closer. And if you look inside, you will see little baby salamanders. There's a pair of eyes. There you go. There's a baby salamander. There's one. There's one. Okay. Notice how that these individual eggs are all sort of covered with a layer of jelly. Yeah. That's how you know that it's a salamander egg mass. Matter of fact, the spotted salamander. If all these were individual little clear globs like grapes, if you would, then you know you have the wood frog, because they share the same habitat, but lots of little tiny ones. Now, they do spend life in the water, but they do go out on land. Turns out that most of our salamander species are terrestrial. That means they live on land. So think about the problem with that. You're going to live on land. What's one of your big problems going to be?
Predators.
Predators?
Such as birds.
Birds.
And wild
Yeah.
all things that are bigger.
All things that are bigger than you, yeah. I like that. So that's word to the wise, all things bigger, watch out for it. Good point. It's dry, so you've got to be in an area that stays moist. So many of our salamanders are referred to as mole, M-O-L-E, mole salamanders. Because of their behavior, they burrow down underneath the leaf litter so that they can stay moist. So what you see, you would think might not be the right habitat for a salamander. But when you start flipping over logs and looking, you start noticing that there are a lot more salamanders than one would think. Perfect habitat for one. You've got a nice log, nice and moist through there. Roll that log toward you, so in case there's anything behind it that strikes. Hopefully it will strike the log, not you. Okay? And look out underneath there, and one never knows what might be there. Now, of course, the Carolinas have not only these beautiful mountain streams. You get to the base, get down into the Piedmont, all the way down to almost the Sandhills area. You're going to get these nice low areas. But the Carolinas also have Arctic relic species. Now, what in the world does that mean? Arctic means cold, right? If you think about going to the Arctic, it is really cold. Relic means sort of left over, if you want to think of it that way. So we have salamander species that live in conditions that would be similar, not exactly like, Arctic environments. So you get up into our high elevations, you get things like fir trees, spruce trees. By the way, what's that white stuff on there? Snow. This picture was taken the end of April, just off the Appalachian Trail up near Klingman's Dome at about 6,000 feet. I'll show you why that's important in just a moment. Now, time for the manders, right? We know a little bit about where they live, why they live there. I'm certainly not going to cover every species of salamander that occurs in the Carolinas. To give you an idea, and it changes almost on a daily basis, maybe not that regularly, but pretty frequently. Right now, somewhere between 68 to 72 species in the Carolinas. And that depends on if you're a lumper or a splitter. Is it a dwarf black-bellied, or are they all black-bellied salamanders? So they're all Desmonathus quadrimaculatum, or is there another one? Okay. So we're going to start out with the smallest one. This little guy is called the dwarf salamander. So would you expect it to be a large salamander? No. The common name describes it a little bit, right?
It's little.
Little bit less than 2 inches long. Okay. Not going to find those down here in the Landrum area. Not going to find them up along the Blue Ridge Parkway. You got to go a little higher than that. You got to get up into Tennessee and those areas to find this little guy. And to recognize him, because he's going to look a lot like a lot of the other ones in a few moments, you look at him from the side, and if you notice on his back, you can kind of see these patterns, and they look like they're shaped of a V. They point up toward the front, so it goes up and then back. It goes up and then back. If any of you remember a gas station called Chevron, the Chevron gas station, a chevron is a shape. And basically, it's sort of like a V shape that's not a very strong one, but kind of spread out, if you would. So that chevron pattern, the very small size, and then the habitat in which it occurs. All right? Now, this would be a little easier to recognize. Sometimes these spots will be orange, but most of the time they're yellow in color. And I'm going to see what you know about salamander taxonomy, the names of salamanders. You ready? What would be the common name of a salamander that is spotted? A salamander that is spotted. What do you think its common name is?
Spotted salamander. Spotted splat.
There you go. She got it. Abystoma maculatum. That'd be his scientific name. Okay? By the way, abystoma in English means very hungry, voracious eater, if you would. But its common name is the spotted salamander. How many of you are from South Carolina? It's okay, you can claim it. This is the South Carolina State salamander. So if you've been in 3rd grade yet, you should know that. If you've already been in 3rd grade and it was so long ago, it's okay if you forgot. All right? The spotted salamander. This is another close relative. Notice that the shape of the animal is very similar. It's very thick and robust, if you would. It's got a nice rounded tail. The shape of the tail is very important for identification. A round tail indicates a terrestrial salamander. A flattened or sort of triangular indicates an aquatic salamander. That nice flat tail allows you to be able to propel through the water faster and get away from your predator, or to maybe catch your prey. Okay. So this little guy has that nice rounded tail, and the pattern, when first saw and described, was known as the marbled salamander. And almost every marbled salamander, the pattern is marbled. Until, there's always exceptions. I was in the Great Smoky Mountains in Cades Cove when we were doing a salamander survey. And this would have been back maybe early 2000s or so. When we were out on rolling logs and looking for them. And we turn it over and we look and we're like, here is this solid, black, robust salamander that looks just like a marbled salamander, but no marbling. Yeah, it's still a marbled salamander. When you look at its genetics, it's still the same critter. But for whatever reason, that particular individual did not have marbling. So there's always exceptions. So there must be other ways to know who they are. And we'll talk about that as we go. Now how can you not look at that cute face and probably not something you want to like cuddle or anything, you know? They are kind of wet, all right? But this guy's part of a real interesting story. Notice what color his cheeks are.
Orange.
Right. Now sometimes they're reddish in color, and evidently the first ones that were seen and described had red to reddish orange in the cheeks. So here we go. What would you call a salamander with red cheeks?
Red-cheeked salamander.
And you'd be correct, a red-cheeked salamander. I'm giving all my secrets away. I was like, this can't be that hard, right? Right. Interesting thing about this is when you look at this one, notice he's got these big, thick cheeks. Okay? And then if you look at this one, notice he also has those same thick cheeks, but they're not red. This is the Jordan salamander. This is one we would find in our area. So how did the other one end up with red cheeks? And even better, why do some of them have red legs? So now we got some, still got the same puffy cheeks. By the way, those are big bundles of ligaments because salamanders open their mouths different than you and I do. When we open our mouth, our jaw is hinged, so our bottom jaw goes down, right? Everybody try that. All right, if you want to be a salamander, you got to hold your jaw still and you got to raise the top of your head. A little bit harder. That's why you have these big, thick ligaments, these strong, like suspension cords to help you raise your head up. Okay? So here's the story. How do these things look similar yet different? One of the great things about the southern Appalachian Mountains and the Appalachians as a whole, particularly from Pennsylvania down, is they weren't glaciated. So roughly 25,000 years ago, plus or so in that neighborhood, but glaciers sort of came scrubbing down across the northeast. They stopped around Pennsylvania. Got cold down here, but it wasn't glaciated. It didn't get scrubbed down to rock. So the plants and animals that could survive, survived within those little small places in which they had adaptations for survival. Well, then the glaciers left. Now, so you have all these salamanders that are all close together. And one of the things that they want to do is make sure that their species continues. Want to make sure that we always have these salamanders. Well, then what ended up happening was these groups got separated into different populations. And so what happened was everybody in this group started to develop red cheeks because that was what was dominant. But this group didn't develop red cheeks. It kept the gray cheeks. This group over here got red legs, but it still kept its gray cheeks. So one of the reasons we have the diversity of salamanders we have is because of something called speciation. Our salamanders have had a really long time to find the right habitat and for their individual traits to come out. Now here's one that gets lots and lots and lots of second looks. Because depending upon the slimy salamander you have, you may not have the same amount of spots. Some have no spotting, some are heavily spotted, but you will know this animal, and I'll probably have to tell you, we'll see if you can get it, because part of his tail's missing. But if you had to guess based on this shape of what's left of its tail, was it round or flattened?
Round.
Round, so this is terrestrial. This one has a way to survive where it's not as wet. The outside of its body is covered with this sort of slimy layer. You ready? What would you call a salamander that is slimy?
A slimy salamander.
A slimy salamander. You guys don't need me for this. You got it. You got it. All right? It's called a slimy salamander. And if you ever pick one of these up, you will know why it's called a slimy. It's very sticky. Very sticky. And everything will stick to it for days. You can wash your hands and wash your hands and wash your hands, but they still stay sticky. Now the neat thing about this animal is you can go down the ridge line, walk down the middle. This side, this side. This side is facing to the north. Doesn't get as much sunlight. It has more moisture. You find the Jordan salamander on that side. You go to the other side, literally from here to that doorway on the other side. There's not as much moisture, and you find the slimy salamanders. But they don't cross the path because they don't need to. They each have their own area in which they can survive in. Nice red back. You ready for this one? You guys have 100 on the test, by the way, already. A salamander with a red back. Perfect, redback salamander. Now you would think that's pretty simplistic, not real difficult. We were doing a study back in 2011 in northern Greenville County looking at different species of salamanders. And one of the individuals working on it in the field came in and I said, so what'd you guys find today? And they started making all this list of things and they were going along and they were listing salamander after salamander. And then I said, whoa, wait, back up. Did you say redback salamander? And the person said, yeah. I said, are you sure? They were sure. I said, then you have a state record. There's never been a redback salamander found in South Carolina. Let's go get it. Turns out it was not a redback. It was a dusky. You're going to see why that's important in just a minute. All right? This one is very easily confused. Nice green patterns throughout. Helps it to camouflage with the mosses and the lichens. Probably because early on it lived up high in the trees. They were arboreal. When we had huge American chestnut trees and large old growth, 150 plus year old trees with very loose bark, these animals could hide inside the crevice. But of course we lost the American chestnut. It still exists, but only in the small stage in most places. So now these things pretty much hang out in rock. All right? And in that area is where they raise their young. Look at that little version of that big one. Now, if you don't think this salamander will defend, you try to pick that little salamander up. And that salamander will do this. How do I know that? Was not I, but Alan Cameron. Alan Cameron and I gave a talk for PAC a number of years ago. And Alan is truly an expert on the green salamanders. He photographed this one over in Transylvania County. And he said every time you go to look up underneath there, this thing would just like leap out at you. So can salamanders bite?
Yes.
Yes, they can. Have I ever been bitten by a salamander? Yeah, but it wasn't too bad. It was a small salamander, okay? But they will bite if they need to, okay? Now,
Mud salamander.
oh, who said mud salamander?
I did.
Awesome, good job. I wasn't really sure how I was going to describe this so you would come up with the common name of mud, but you did. Pseudotriton is the genus in which this one falls in. The other ones we've been looking at have been things like abistomas and desmonathus, things of that nature. So we're now really getting to a whole different genus or level of them. Once again, really thick animal, but it is known as the mud salamander. Now I'll be impressed if you can tell me what this one is.
Leaf salamander.
I'm going to help you with the first part. Notice that it's sort of orange in color. This is a Eurycia. Eurycia is a genus. Notice there's a black line. There's one. There's a second one, so it has two lines.
Black and orange leaf salamander.
So what would you call a salamander that is two-lined?
2 lines of salamander. Double line salamander. 2 line salamander.
Perfect, the two-line salamander.
Hey, I think.
All right, bonus. Is this the southern two-line? Is this the Blue Ridge two-line? Or is this the northern two-line?
North. Blue Ridge. Blue Ridge.
Gets a little more difficult, doesn't it? If you know where you collected it, if you know where the animal came from, if it was at a really high elevation, pretty much the far northern part of North Carolina, it was probably a northern two-line. If you were at high elevation, typically above 3,000 feet or so, and that number keeps changing, but roughly 3,000 feet or so, it's going to be your Blue Ridge two-line. And then when you get below 3,000, it's either a hybrid or it's a southern two-line. This happens to be a southern two-line. I collected it along Highway 11. Actually, I photographed it. I didn't collect this one. I was on a Heritage Trust site doing a program. But this is the southern two-line. And at the same location, not too far away, we found one that has 3 lines. No, it is not a 2-line salamander with 3 lines. It is truly a 3-line salamander. All right? Oh, awesome. This is the salamander that most of you have probably seen. If you go for a walk in a forest after it has rained and you look out along the side of the trail, you're most likely to find this salamander. They're real small, but then they grow a little larger. But they're brightly colored, and as I said, their color is very bold, and so are they. If you're that brightly colored, pretty much you are telling everything out there, no worries, you don't want to eat me. I'm poisonous. By the way, all 570 plus known species of salamanders in the world are poisonous. Is it going to hurt you or I? No.
No.
Okay? But inside their skin, like many of our frogs and toads, they contain some toxins as a defense mechanism. Okay? Look really close. Notice it's got little red spots. Now, look at this one. Little red spots. Terrestrial. There's the round tail. Aquatic. There's the flattened tail. Right there. If I can get that little thing to go. There we go. This is the same kind of salamander. This is the teenager. Okay, it can't be the baby because if it's the baby, the larva, it has gills. Loses those gills, comes out, and it's called a red eft, E-F-T. E-F-T is an old English word that means salamander. Okay? But as an adult, it goes back to the water where it spends the rest of its life. Now this animal has to swim to the surface to get a breath of air and then drops back down. So if you go to an area where there's not a lot of fish, you may see this. Every program that I give on salamanders, I have had one of these. I went to my favorite collecting spot. And when I pulled up to the pond, I looked, and the pond looked really, really different. There was vegetation growing in the pond. There were plants growing in the middle of the pond. I was like, never been any. There was this algae growing there that had never been there. And everywhere I looked, there was a fish. Bluegill, bass, trout. I mean, it was just full of fish. Got a little nervous. I walked the entire shoreline. It's been an hour. Did I find one of these? No. I think they were all recycled and changed into fish. That fish rearranged those atoms into the shape of a fish, no longer a salamander. Okay? All right. It looks like a big blob, doesn't it? Look at those little tiny, tiny eyes. Every other salamander we've seen has had big eyes. This one has little tiny eyes. Oh, just wait till I tell you how big this thing gets. This salamander can be 2 feet long. By the way, I'm a fisherman, so I don't know if that's 2 feet or not. But something like that's 2 feet, okay? 24 inches or so. It retains its gill slits right through there, so it doesn't have gills anymore, but it still has the gill slits. It looks like a big blob. It's found underneath the rocks. The common name for this guy is the Hellbender. Okay. And the Hellbender is a very large aquatic salamander, and if you're really lucky and you happen to be in the right place at the right time, you get to see him in the wild. The first time I ever saw one in the wild was pretty awesome. We got to see 2 in the same day. It was floating on an inner tube in the Pisgah National Forest, Davidson River, if I recall. And my tubing partner looked down and said, "What's that?" After a little convincing, she got off the tube. Very brave. I think she was maybe 10 at the time, to check it out. Holding on very tightly and trusting that I wasn't going to get her eaten up by something called a Hellbender. Neat, neat animal. If you're ever up near Pisgah National Forest, go by the ranger station. They have an incredible little video that talks about that this is an animal that's in trouble. They are declining tremendously in number, but a really, really fascinating animal. So the pygmies are smallest at 2 inches. Hellbender is our largest in North America, at least in our area. If you get into the sirens and things like that, they get a little bigger.
Why are they declining?
They're declining because of habitat loss and destruction. Habitat destruction. Predominantly sedimentation in the streams, water temperature increasing. Yeah. Here's that black-bellied salamander that I showed you, hanging out on the cliff faces at Pierson Falls. And that's what they typically look like. Okay. But look at that carefully, and then look at this guy. Now it's time to get some salamanders out. So here's what's going to happen. These 2 young ladies are actually going to be helping me out. The first 2, the green one and the blue one, are the same kind. So I tell you what, ladies, if you don't mind, one of you start on this side, and then one of you start on this side, and then work your way back. Okay. Make sure they get a chance. After the program, I promise you'll have a chance to be able to come up and get better looks at them. But while I'm up here babbling, you know, why not take a look at them? This next group we're going to get into, when I first started studying salamanders, it was so much easier. We just called them all mountain duskies. If you're in the mountains, it's a mountain dusky. If you're kind of in the lower Piedmont, it's a northern dusky. And if you get out of the lower, kind of the sort of the southern part of the Piedmont, not too far, you get into the southern dusky. Well, there's 9 or 10 of them now. Okay? My favorite description of a salamander, if you look in any book, almost the first, if not the first, the second sentence will tell you, highly variable in color and pattern. Now that's helpful, isn't it? Okay? Now stick with me as we go through here. The one that these young ladies are bringing around right now, and they'll make their way around, notice has sort of a, not like the redback, it looks similar. It can be sort of a reddish pattern, but look at these little silvery spots through here. Okay? So this is the spotted dusky, okay, which you guys are going to see. Now this one even looks more like a redback, but not a redback. This is going to be your mountain dusky, and there's like 4 different ones that use that same common name. Okay. And remember, it depends on where you live, if you're a salamander, as to whom you might be. Because most importantly, your genetics, just like you and I, your genetics come from your parents. So depending upon the adults within that population, it's going to have a great effect on what the young look like. Okay? And by the way, who can tell me which species of Dusky this is? This is looking at an electrophoresis gel. You hear people talking about DNA and DNA analysis. DNA is incredible. We are continuing to learn that we have even more species of living things on the planet than we thought. Because to begin with, all we had to work with were some basic things like, what's it look like? What are some of the things that you can tell about the smell, the texture? Then you could also do some chemical analysis on certain things and figure them out. But then all of a sudden came along, Watson and Crick got credit for figuring out this thing on the double helix. There were other scientists working on it as well. But when you take a little snip of the salamander tail and you put it in the blender and you run the gel, you end up getting something like this. And what you're trying to do is to look to see what lines up. So this salamander and this salamander, salamander 1 and 2, notice that this looks just like that and everything lines up. That's a lot of how the new species are coming into play. It's because they look the same in the field, as you're going to see as they come around, but with DNA, you get an idea of that they're really very different. Okay? By the way, this is kind of related to salamanders. Mushrooms, they're in the kingdom fungi, right? Do you think fungi, in terms of their genetics, are more closely related to plants or animals? Animals, very good. But we didn't know that until DNA. There might have been some suspicion going on out there. But now we know, looking at the genetics, that turns out kingdom fungi, in other words mushrooms and others, are more closely related to animals than they are plants. By the way, fungi used to just be included with the plants. They're not anymore. They figured that out before I got to school, but not too much before. All right? What do you think? Dusky. Probably another mountain dusky. This is northern dusky. Notice the northern dusky is a little bit easier to pick up on. It doesn't quite have the same patterning through there. Still got the keeled tail, still got the big giant eyes, still got the blunt nose. Still has this little line going from the blunt nose back to the eyeball. All the duskies have that. Okay. By the way, with salamanders, if you start checking out salamanders and looking at them up close, you'll notice these are not live salamanders I'm throwing away. These are anatomically correct, okay? So, and we'll just pass those around, let the young folks get a look, we'll pass them back. But I want you to notice that as you rub the side of the salamander, you can feel little ridges. Just like if you feel the side of your body, you feel ridges, they're your ribs. These things are called intercostal grooves. That's the space between your ribs. That's one of the ways you identify salamanders, how many intercostal grooves they have. And if you look, you can see some of the intercostals on this animal, right through here, through here. You'll be able to see them much better on the live specimens coming around. So there's a lot of external features that you can utilize, but now it's gotten to the point where it's all the way down to DNA if you want to know for sure. Okay? All right. So I have just touched on some of the information about salamanders, a general introduction, a little bit about identification, a little bit about life.